Why do black singers and rappers in the hip-hop community wear sagging pants? They keep their pants deliberately lower than their waist, and the underwear is visible. Interestingly, this is considered a fashion statement and representation of freedom. However, they are unaware of the history of such practices, beliefs, and terminologies that have roots in slavery. Back in the slavery era, black men who were sexually abused were made to wear their pants below their waist as a sign of humiliation and subjugation. And to ensure that black people are humiliated to this day, white supremacists have made this a fashion. Yet, it does not stop here. Various beliefs and practices continue to linger in our society, affecting black people's lives. What are they? Welcome to a new episode of Black Afric Diary, a channel where we talk about Black African history, culture, arts, and civilization. It's a place where you will see the real picture of Black Africa, its stories, and the events defining it. In this episode, we will tell you about the unknown practices, beliefs, and terminologies that have roots in slavery and manifest to this day. Let's get started. During the era of slavery in the United States, white supremacists and slave owners devised a series of harmful stereotypes, behaviors, and false beliefs to justify the brutal treatment of black people. These stereotypes served as tools to dehumanize black individuals, making it easier for white society to accept and perpetuate the institution of slavery. The distorted beliefs that emerged during this period not only sanctioned the cruelty of slavery, but also laid the foundation for systemic racism that continues to influence societal attitudes and behaviors today. Number 1. The Sambo stereotype. The Sambo stereotype depicted black men as passive, submissive, and inherently content with their roles as slaves. This image suggested that black men were naturally suited for servitude, portraying them as lazy, carefree, and incapable of independent thought or action. The Sambo was often characterized as a perpetual child who needed the guidance and control of a white master, unable to make decisions for himself or grasp complex concepts. This stereotype was reinforced through various media forms, such as literature, minstrel shows, and advertisements, which spread the false notion that black men were naturally inferior and only fit for subservient roles. And back then, it worked, convincing even those white people who were slightly against slavery. The Sambo stereotype was a powerful tool for justifying slavery, suggesting that it was a benevolent institution providing care and direction to people who were supposedly unable to manage their own lives. By portraying black men as content in their subjugation, this stereotype deflected criticism of slavery and perpetuated the myth that black people were inherently suited to be enslaved. It stripped black men of their humanity, rationalizing their exploitation and mistreatment by implying they were better off under the control of white masters. Number 2. The Mammy stereotype. The Mammy stereotype depicted black women as loyal, nurturing, and self-sacrificing, particularly in their roles as caregivers for white families. The Mammy figure was portrayed as a desexualized maternal character who devoted her life to serving her white family with undying loyalty and affection, often at the expense of her own family and well-being. This stereotype reassured white society that black women were not only content with their roles as servants, but also found joy and fulfillment in serving white households. This portrayal served multiple purposes. First, it masked the sexual exploitation many black women endured during slavery by presenting them as asexual and purely maternal figures. This allowed white slave owners and society to overlook the widespread sexual abuse of black women, framing them as willing participants in their oppression. Second, the Mammy stereotype justified the continued subjugation of black women by suggesting that they were naturally suited to a life of service and were content in their roles, reinforcing the racial and gender hierarchies of the time. Number 3. The Jezebel stereotype. In contrast to the Mammy stereotype, the Jezebel stereotype depicted black women as hypersexual, promiscuous, and morally loose. This image portrayed black women as seductresses who used their sexuality to manipulate men, including white men. The Jezebel stereotype was used to justify the widespread sexual abuse and exploitation of enslaved black women by suggesting that they were inherently lustful and always willing or even eager participants in sexual activities. Not only that, but the entire blame of sexual exploitation was put on black women. Therefore, all acts of sexual exploitation were considered consensual sexual encounters where white men were seduced. This stereotype completely ignored the pain and suffering white women went through. This portrayal served to exonerate white slave owners and other white men of responsibility for the sexual exploitation and abuse of black women, shifting the blame onto the victims instead. By portraying black women as sexually aggressive and morally deficient, the Jezebel stereotype rationalized sexual coercion, presenting them as natural consequences of black women's supposedly insatiable sexual appetites. Number 4. The brute stereotype. The brute stereotype portrayed black men as inherently violent, aggressive, and a threat to white society, especially white women. This stereotype cast black men as dangerous predators who needed to be controlled and subdued through extreme measures, including violence and lynching. The brute stereotype was used to justify harsh legal penalties, systemic violence, and extrajudicial punishments, such as lynchings, inflicted on black men. This stereotype was designed to instill fear in the white populace, perpetuating the belief that black men were a constant danger to white communities. It rationalized the use of extreme punitive measures against black men and the denial of their civil rights, framing such actions as necessary for the protection of white society. The brute stereotype also perpetuated the false belief that black men were inherently prone to criminal behavior and violence, a misconception that continues to influence perceptions of black men in the criminal justice system and society at large. Number 5. The welfare queen stereotype. The origins of the welfare queen stereotype can be traced back to the period of slavery in America. During this time, enslaved black people were often labeled as lazy by their white slave owners. This label served as a justification for the brutal conditions of forced labor and the severe mistreatment that enslaved individuals endured. By depicting black people as inherently lazy and incapable of self-sufficiency, slave owners rationalized their exploitation and subjugation, which was central to the economic system of slavery. This dehumanizing stereotype continued even after the abolition of slavery, evolving into new forms that continued to marginalize black communities. After slavery ended, the stereotype of laziness was repurposed to fit new social and economic contexts. In the 20th century, as welfare programs were established to support impoverished communities, the narrative shifted to target black women, especially those who relied on government assistance. The term welfare queen emerged as a derogatory label used to depict black women as abusing welfare systems for personal gain. This stereotype portrayed a black woman living extravagantly on government aid, deliberately having more children to receive higher benefits, and manipulating the system through deceit. The welfare queen stereotype gained popularity in the public mind and was often used to justify cuts to social programs. The welfare queen stereotype was further entrenched in the 1970s, largely due to the case of Linda Taylor, a woman who gained notoriety for alleged welfare fraud. Taylor was accused of using multiple identities and fake names to collect welfare benefits far beyond what she was legally entitled to. Although her case was an outlier rather than a common occurrence, it was sensationalized by politicians and the media to argue that the welfare system was plagued by fraud and predominantly exploited by black people. Number 6. Colorism. Colorism, or discrimination based on skin tone, dates back to the era of slavery. During this time, lighter-skinned enslaved individuals, often the children of black women and white slave owners, were sometimes treated more favorably than their darker-skinned counterparts. They were more likely to be assigned to less grueling indoor work, while darker-skinned enslaved people were typically relegated to hard labor in the fields. This preference for lighter skin created a social hierarchy that persists both within and outside black communities today. Colorism influences everything from job opportunities and media representation to social interactions and beauty standards, often reinforcing harmful stereotypes that associate lighter skin with greater value and darker skin with inferiority. Number 7, the 3/5 compromise. Mentality. The 3/5 compromise, enshrined in the U.S. Constitution in 1787, counted enslaved Black people as 3/5 of a person for purposes of representation and taxation. Although this law is no longer in effect, its legacy of dehumanization and undervaluing Black lives persists. Modern disparities in voting rights, political representation, and access to education and economic opportunities can be traced back to the mindset that viewed Black people as less than fully human. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. Number 8. Stereotypes of criminality and hypersurveillance. The stereotype of Black criminality, depicting Black people, especially men, as inherently prone to criminal behavior, originated during slavery and was reinforced during the Reconstruction era. This stereotype was used to justify harsh policing and brutal punishment, promoting a narrative that Black people were inherently dangerous and needed to be controlled. Today, this stereotype continues to manifest in racial profiling, the over-policing of Black communities, and disproportionate incarceration rates of Black individuals. Practices like stop and frisk, racial bias in law enforcement, and harsher sentencing for Black people compared to white individuals all stem from this deeply ingrained bias. Number 9. Stereotypes of intellectual inferiority. The notion that Black people are intellectually inferior to white people was propagated during slavery to justify their enslavement and mistreatment. Pseudoscientific theories, such as phrenology, were used to claim that Black people were naturally less intelligent and incapable of complex thought or self-governance. This harmful stereotype persists in educational settings today, where Black students often face lower expectations, limited access to advanced coursework, and biased assessments of their abilities. The myth of intellectual inferiority continues to hinder educational and career opportunities for Black people, reinforcing systemic barriers to equality. Number 10. The angry Black woman and strong Black man. Stereotypes. These stereotypes portray Black women as perpetually angry and aggressive, and Black men as hypermasculine and emotionally stoic. Both originated from efforts to suppress Black resistance to slavery and systemic racism. The angry Black woman stereotype dismisses legitimate grievances about discrimination and injustice, suggesting that Black women's emotions are exaggerated or unwarranted. Similarly, the strong Black man stereotype pressures Black men to adopt rigid standards of masculinity, denying them the freedom to express vulnerability. These stereotypes limit authentic emotional expression and perpetuate unrealistic expectations of Black behavior. Number 11. Driving while Black and racial profiling. Driving while Black is a term that describes the racial profiling practices where Black drivers are disproportionately stopped, searched, and detained by law enforcement. This practice has historical roots in the Black Codes and Jim Crow laws, which sought to control the movements of Black people after the abolition of slavery. Today, Driving While Black shows broader systemic issues in policing and justice, highlighting the ongoing racial biases that permeate law enforcement practices. Number 12. Stereotypes in health and medical care. Medical racism is another legacy of slavery, where Black people were historically subjected to inhumane medical experiments and denied adequate health care. This history has fostered deep mistrust of the medical system within Black communities, and for good reasons. There have been countless instances during slavery when Black men and women were made targets of medical experiments, often without anesthesia. One of the most infamous experiments was performed between 1845 and 1849 by Dr. J. Marion Sims. He carried out a series of painful gynecological experiments on enslaved Black women in Montgomery, Alabama. His goal was to develop surgical techniques to repair vesicovaginal fistulas, a complication that can occur after childbirth. Sims performed these procedures on at least 3 enslaved women, Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy, without using anesthesia, even though it was available at the time. He justified this decision with the racist belief that Black women did not experience pain in the same way as white women, reflecting a broader pseudoscientific ideology that was used to rationalize the cruel treatment of Black people. Under these harsh conditions, Sims operated on Anarcha as many as 30 times. The use of enslaved Black women for these experiments was defended by the notion that their suffering was a necessary sacrifice for medical progress. Number 13. The term motherfucker. The term motherfucker carries a deeply disturbing history that dates back to the era of slavery in the United States. During this time, the word was used as a derogatory slur specifically aimed at enslaved Black men. Its meaning went far beyond a simple insult. It suggested that these men had been forced into sexual relations with their mothers under coercive and often violent circumstances. The term reflects the brutal reality of the abuse and dehumanization that enslaved people endured, and its origins are rooted in one of the darkest chapters of American history. It's painful to know that enslaved Black men were sometimes forced by slave owners to engage in sexual acts with their mothers or other family members as a method of punishment or to humiliate them further. This practice was intended to strip them of their dignity and reduce their humanity in the eyes of both the enslaved community and white observers. These coerced acts were often carried out publicly, serving as a dirty form of entertainment for the slave owners while reinforcing their control over the enslaved population. The coerced sexual abuse was a deliberate tactic designed to break the spirits of enslaved men, destroy familial bonds, and inflict severe psychological trauma. This form of abuse not only humiliated the individuals directly involved, but also instilled a deep sense of shame and fear throughout the enslaved community. The use of the term motherfucker by slave owners was a constant reminder of this dehumanizing treatment, reinforcing their dominance over every aspect of the enslaved people's lives. This dehumanization was a calculated strategy employed by slaveholders to maintain control. By breaking down familial bonds and instilling fear, slave owners sought to prevent unity and resistance among the enslaved population. Thus, the term motherfucker was not just an insult, but a powerful tool of psychological manipulation, used to uphold a system of oppression and control. Number 14. Sagging pants. The style of wearing sagging pants, which has become a popular fashion trend within modern African American culture, has a history rooted in the harsh realities of slavery in the United States. While it may seem like a contemporary statement of style, the origins of sagging pants are tied to the brutal and dehumanizing treatment of enslaved Black men. Unfortunately, many who adopt this trend today may not fully understand its painful historical background. The practice of sagging pants dates back to the period of American slavery, where it was used as a method of humiliation and control by white slave owners. Enslaved Black men who tried to escape or resist their oppression were often subjected to severe punishments as a way to discourage others from similar acts of defiance. One of the most heinous forms of punishment involved sexual violence. Enslaved men who defied their masters or attempted to flee were sometimes raped by their white owners. In those days, if white men were not straight and were gay, this was hidden and revealed only when a Black male slave was to be sexually exploited. This act was not only a means of asserting dominance, but also served as a psychological weapon to weaken the men and break their spirits. Following such traumatic abuse, these men were often forced to lower their pants as a visible indication of the violation they had endured. This practice of sagging was intended to publicly shame them, reinforcing their subjugation and serving as a warning to others who might consider rebelling or attempting to escape. By making these men walk with sagging pants, slave owners aimed to instill fear and maintain a climate of control over the enslaved community, further entrenching the oppressive power dynamics of the time. Not only that, but sagging pants were used as a sign for white men to simply pick that Black slave again in the future and repeat the sexual abuse. Today, sagging pants have emerged as a prominent fashion statement, especially among African American men and teenage boys. The style is often associated with hip-hop culture, projecting a rebellious or nonconformist image. However, many who embrace this trend are unaware of its historical origins and the degrading practices that gave rise to it. For some, sagging pants represent cultural expression or a way to project toughness and street credibility. Despite its contemporary appeal, the continued popularity of this style can carry unintended consequences tied to its historical context. Unrevealed to many who wear sagging pants, this practice is linked to a history of severe humiliation and dehumanization. By adopting this style without understanding its origins, individuals may inadvertently perpetuate a legacy of degradation that was once used to strip Black men of their dignity and humanity. Furthermore, this trend makes them targets of white supremacist ideologies. White supremacists, who have historically sought to demean and control Black bodies, may see the ongoing trend of sagging pants among Black men as a continuation of their oppressive objectives. Even today, some white supremacists perceive Black men wearing sagging pants as evidence of their ability to maintain control and degrade Black men publicly. This perception reinforces harmful stereotypes and continues a cycle of disrespect and degradation toward Black men. The history of slavery in the United States has left a profound and lasting impact on societal beliefs, practices, and stereotypes. Many of these legacies continue to shape the experiences of Black people today, influencing perceptions, behaviors, and institutional structures across various aspects of modern life. Number 15. Acting white accusation. The phrase acting white is often used as a critique directed at Black individuals, particularly youth, who are seen as adopting behaviors, speech patterns, or attitudes commonly associated with white culture. It's completely ignored that slavery does not exist to this day, when Black people could not do the same as white people. This accusation can apply to actions such as speaking standard English, excelling academically, or engaging in activities not traditionally linked to Black communities. The accusation of acting white has deep roots in the United States history of racial segregation and cultural division. During slavery and the Jim Crow era, rigid distinctions were enforced between Black and white communities. Black people were systematically excluded from spaces and activities considered white, and any attempt to blur these cultural lines was often met with severe punishment or social ostracization. Following the civil rights movement and the integration of public schools, these cultural boundaries began to shift. However, the legacy of segregation and systemic inequality within the education system persisted. Black students in predominantly white schools or environments often faced criticism if they excelled academically or adopted behaviors associated with the cultural norms of those settings. Being accused of acting white can create deep internal conflict for Black individuals, particularly teenagers who are already facing complex social dynamics. This label can make them feel alienated from their own racial or cultural group, leading to feelings of not fully belonging to either Black or white communities. This dual sense of alienation can negatively affect self-esteem and mental health, as individuals may feel compelled to conform to a limited identity that doesn't fully enclose their experiences or aspirations. What do you think about the possibility that Black culture has been mostly shaped by white supremacists who want Black people to be distracted and disgraced? Isn't it true that whatever Black people adopt and accept today should be questioned first by them? In the comment section right below, share your thoughts on why white supremacists want to continue using those slavery-era practices, beliefs, and terminologies. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.